We really are putting ourselves at risk of believing many conspiracy theories just based on the way our brain has been designed to work in general. Once we kind of release this technology without the safeguards in place, it is very hard to bring it back in. Many organizations have become risk adverse because they don't want to step out of line or stick their neck out too much in fear of retaliation. Make sure we have the right leaders in place, right? Because they are going to be driving the direction of the country with many of these decisions that cause a lot of stalling in the advancements that we have made. Once we start to see the actual declines happening, people will start to react to counter that very quickly. If you compare that to a country like China, for example, that is only putting more money and more resources into their scientific and technological systems to make sure that they are advancing quicker and faster, the question then becomes, are we still able to compete at that scale and at that speed? My perspective is that we cannot be the leader in the world and still cut all our funding. Those two simply do not tie together. We are working on behalf and for the public, and therefore we must do a better job of translating why it is that we're doing it and why it matters.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Science Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Mohammed Itafak. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Catharine Young, who has a PhD in biomedical sciences and recently served as Assistant Director of Cancer Moonshot Policy and International Engagement at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or known as OSTP, where she was advancing the agenda on cancer moonshot with a mission to decrease the number of cancer deaths by 50% over the next 25 years. But now we are in a very different situation. The administration has changed, and the things have changed significantly over the last 1 year almost now. So, Dr. Catherine, also a senior fellow at Harvard School of Public Health, where I am also. So we just kind of go back and forth, to Harvard. So before I welcome my guest, I would ask you to share these conversations with the people who have similar interests, who care about the planet and the planetary health. Dr. Catherine Young, welcome to Science Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start talking a little bit about X.
Okay,
Not
let's do
your
it.
ex or my ex, everybody ex. No, everybody's ex. So what's going on? You're very active there. A lot of people have migrated virtually, including myself, but I came back. I don't know if you
Okay.
did, but so why did you stay on the
Yeah.
platform?
It's a good question, and it's a question I get asked all the time. But in a way, I felt it was a duty to use the platform in a way that I could, progress science communication in a way to an audience that hopefully will maybe stumble upon it in some way. In reality, will I change everybody's mind that maybe has a different opinion? No, and I don't expect to. But I do feel that it is a personal obligation to put out correct and accurate scientific information and to try and counter in the best way as I can as a singular individual to start to counter some of this scientific misinformation that or disinformation that we certainly have seen a radical rise in over the past few years.
Yeah, so it has nothing to do one South African supporting another one, right? No, so just because
Listen,
we have a two
I
people, we have two South Africans, both work for the White House.
this
So
is
with one with the
true.
chainsaw, so I just want to make sure that.
You know what? I support anybody who's innovative and advances technology. And you know, Elon Musk, regardless of how you feel about him, we actually do come from very similar backgrounds and very similar geographical regions in South Africa. Our immigration stories are very similar, so there are many parallels there. But certainly, that was not the core of me
Okay.
staying on X.
Yes, just want to be on the record for people
Yes.
to yes. So, what is something really striking to you on X, looking at the scale?
Yeah.
and the magnitude of misinformation related to science?
Oh, I have seen an evolution over the past few years of just really a part of our public that holds on to science, myths, and disinformation very strongly. And I've come to realize it's a very difficult thing to counter.
Mhm.
Particularly for those who are holding on to those misconceptions because of an emotional attachment, right? And so many of the controversies do have an emotional component to it.
Absolutely.
Many are, say, for example, the cause of autism in
Mhm.
children. For those who have experienced a child being diagnosed with autism, of course, that is, a very difficult, challenging, devastating diagnosis. And the emotions and that attachment to wanting to understand exactly and place blame on whatever it is that caused it is very, very strong. And so to be able to counter that emotional piece is I think I've realized almost impossible, right? Like there are people who will hold on to these concepts probably forever. But again, to my earlier point, there probably are some minds that
Mhm.
are right on the brink of not knowing exactly what to believe. And
Absolutely.
so if we're able to, as scientists, be
Mhm.
able to put out information that we know to be true and can stand behind and defend it, then I think, we have an obligation to do that.
About that, do you think that these tech bros um, are also, to certain extent, are responsible how these platforms are being run and profiting from these
Mm,
lies and misinformation? Because at the end of the day, it's the policies of that platform. For example, they have a community. They used to have a community notes, right? They changed those,
right.
and then Facebook had a very good fact checking, third party fact checking guidelines and stuff mechanism in place. They get rid of that after because there was a
Yeah.
precedent, like Elon Musk took over, and then it's like, okay, we can do that too, and nobody cares. So, do you think, like, looking at the scale and magnitude again, these platforms are also responsible for what is going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. Whoever leads these, incredibly public, impactful platforms
Mhm.
do have a responsibility to make sure that the policies are in alignment with the utmost protection of the public in mind. And certainly, I think we've seen over the years that has not always been the case.
Yeah,
We also know that the brain loves controversy, right? I mean, we
absolutely. Yeah,
will, hold on to and be attracted to
yeah,
all the drama
yeah.
more so than the very boring scientific facts,
Mhm.
right? And so we know that drama sells and certainly creates a lot of engagement for individuals as well. So I think it's a very complicated
Mhm.
ecosystem that we're operating in. And I think everybody has a responsibility from
Absolutely.
the top down, right?
Mhm.
Even those who are at an individual level, putting out information there. And I think that's such a difficult thing to control, right?
Yeah,
Because it all comes down to our right to freedom of speech as well. So
yes.
how do we control these things in the most kind of protective way for not only the public, but our children too, who are
Mhm.
kind of growing up through this very new era of information bombardment that they're
Yes.
getting every day as well. So so many challenges, and
Mhm.
I think we certainly haven't figured them out at all.
Mhm.
And with the advent of AI and how
Yeah.
that is, just steamrolling forward, I think we are going to be facing a lot more challenges in the future, particularly as we build systems for AI. We want to make sure that the information and the data that it is fed is not done in a biased way, that is
Mhm.
not on unfounded and and disinformation, because that's just going to amplify
Yeah.
these incredibly difficult issues that we're facing already. So we're entering a really, really, really complicated time in
Yeah.
life,
It
and I
is.
think we need all the brain power behind this to figure out what the best solutions are.
And you're a neuroscientist, right? So
I am.
is it like our brains are wired now, to this like bombardment of content we're looking at on multiple platforms. There's like
Yeah.
more than dozen platform
Hmm.
continuously scrolling down.
Hmm.
So is it like our brain is capable? I mean, it's capable, it's a very strong, capable of doing a lot of things, but
Yeah.
isn't that causing us too many problems in terms of health? Because, like, looking at, the scale of loneliness and also depression and
Yeah.
anxiety and overall mental health issues in the States
Mm,
and overall in the West, if we look at, and the picture is not very positive. And
mm,
now we have the chatbots people are interacting with, and there are like many lawsuits about, taking your
mm.
own life, with
Yeah.
chat
Yeah.
after chatting with Chat GPT. So, as a neuroscientist, how do you see these things that technology is supposed to solve our problems, but it's causing
Mm.
a lot more problems than it's solving, maybe? I don't know.
Right. No, absolutely. The unintended consequences, right?
Mhm,
I mean, I think we always design technology with probably good intent in
mhm,
mind, but we sometimes are unable to see what the unintended consequences will be once, something really takes off and moves ahead,
mhm,
and keeps ahead of the systems that are meant to keep it in check, right? So we know for sure from a policy perspective, from a government
mhm.
perspective, that our policies and our frameworks often lag way behind the advancement of technologies, and in this case, AI as well. And quite frankly, it depends on who's in power and
Yes.
what their viewpoints are in terms of technology and AI development that will either start to clamp down a little bit more on these systems or release them as well. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here with this new administration. Now, in terms of, mental health and things like that, yes, I mean it's a two-sided coin. I think there are benefits to social media. I think we are able
Absolutely.
to, while it is not in person, there's still
Mhm.
a lot of engagement and allows us, for
Yes.
example, you and I to be able
Yes.
to communicate and keep in touch with family members and friends across the world that we probably would not have been able to do like 10, 20 years ago, right? So I think from that perspective, it's great. On the other side, it is changing the way our brain operates and what our brain wants. Our
Mhm.
brain is designed to make short to kind of operate on shortcuts already.
Mhm.
So, we are at more risk to kind of start to ingest and hold on to misconceptions just because we are bombarded constantly with this massive information and we don't take the time or quite frankly have the time
Have the
to
time, yeah.
critically think through
Mhm.
what it is that we're consuming and is it right or not, right? And so we really are putting ourselves at risk of believing many conspiracy theories just based on the way our brain has been designed to work in general.
Yeah, so and I think you alluded a little bit like it depends also who's in power and how they regulate these companies and like our yes, on the one hand the challenge is we have to compete with a lot of other countries like China and other
Mm,
countries who are developing these, technologies. But on the other hand, you don't want to, oversight these safety nets we want to
absolutely.
put for our kids and younger generations or for everybody because
Yeah,
AI safety is a real thing. We want
absolutely.
to build a technology which is humane, which is ethical, which is safe
Absolutely.
for us to use. But looking at the current administration, which has like, love billions and billions and trillions, it's just like these tech bros are pumping billions of dollars and they want to compete even within the US, Microsoft
Mm,
with
mhm,
IBM to,
mhm.
Google to Grok and all these AI
Yeah.
companies. So there is a competition, sense of
Mm,
competition within companies, bypassing maybe rules and regulations.
mm.
So is the OSTP, for example, do something like that? Like who regulate them and how do we kind of not hold these companies back from innovation?
Yeah.
But also develop these technologies which are more human and safe and ethical. And I think it may be used, it can be used that argument that there are unintended consequences. But now there's more information coming out that sometimes these companies know the risks, but they still let it go
Yeah.
because they want to put another version of ChatGPT or something, just to
Right.
name one. So
Yeah.
how do we as a government when you were in like working for the White House and now you see other people. I don't know if OSTP still exists or like it's died
It
or like
does still
it's
exist.
still okay. Okay,
Mhm,
I'm glad. But like
mhm.
it's like something they used to work on some of these things and they encounter
Yes.
these issues, and now how they're dealing with it, and like how do we navigate this
Yeah.
complex, ever-changing dynamic?
Absolutely. Well, from my perspective, in terms of the Biden-Harris administration, I mean, yes, there were scores of people working on this in the background to try to come to consensus in terms of how do we regulate, particularly the AI piece and also the data piece in general. So, how do we make sure that data is collected in a uniform way, is standardized, can be shareable in a really great way, but also is protected, especially if it's personal information as well. There are many components in the government that are all kind of thinking through this from a different perspective or a different lens. And so interagency coordination and connection between in the government is really critical because every piece is going to hit a different part of AI regulation. But ultimately, it comes down to, for example, a president signing an executive order that puts something out there to say that this is how it's going to be done. And so really it ends up laying at the very top levels that ultimately decide in which direction we're going.
Yeah.
And so it's been an interesting evolution that we've seen. I mean, we know this administration certainly values some things over other things that can either help those that are developing and wanting to push out faster versus being very intentional and protective around these systems. There's a lot of tension between those two, and I think we'll see over the next few months to the next year or two exactly how this will start playing out in the public. And the one issue that I will say is that once we kind of release this technology without the safeguards in
Yeah.
place, it is very hard to
Yeah.
bring it back in, right? It's very hard to reel it
Absolutely.
back in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think the government has a very, very large responsibility to make sure we don't put ourselves into a position where we are endangering people and their lives.
So in terms of, again, going back, you have been working for various companies, for various projects. You have published as well as a scholar, as a PhD scientist, working for the government, work for the, even non-profit for time being. So when you look at the scale of misinformation, disinformation campaigns, honestly, like, is it really our job to go and correct some of the things that we are using Wi-Fi, but we are not being exposed to radiation, and there are
Yeah,
no deaths. People are dying because they're using Wi-Fi. So, because you're
right,
busy, right? We are busy. We have families, we have jobs, we have other things to
right.
worry about.
Yeah.
So right now, do you think lately I've been thinking about this, like, and I just want to ask you, do you think it's a time for the universities and like, institutions to rethink the role
Mm,
of experts looking at the scale of
mm,
misinformation, disinformation related to science, health, climate, you just name it,
yeah.
anything. And there's a huge kind of, like bots or maybe real humans, I don't know, on these platforms attacking you from left and right, and just not
Mm-hmm,
you, but overall questioning the
mm-hmm,
facts. And
mm-hmm.
you're fighting with them, and we don't have enough time. We don't have the luxury to, do exercise for an hour a day and like fighting with these
Right.
people on X or other platforms.
Yeah.
So, like, in your experience, do you think there's like need to be overall realization at academic institutional level that we
Mm,
need to do something? This problem is becoming
yeah.
bigger and bigger.
I do. And I have actually advocated for this for many years that we need to rethink our graduate school training, particularly for our STEM PhD
Yes.
program. And that should include how do we communicate our science
Hmm.
to the lay public in a
Yes.
way that makes sense and in a way that actually starts to break down those barriers between the institutions that we reside in, which
Mhm.
many look at as like the ivory towers,
Yes.
versus the public who are honestly just trying to live their lives in the best way possible from day to day, right? And so the way that I view it is, we have hundreds and thousands of trained scientists around the US and around the world. Imagine if we were able to unify our voices to really, counter some of the misinformation that we're starting to see. Well, not starting to see, we see it.
Yeah.
There's so much power in numbers, and when those numbers start to become unified, it's almost the same. I view it almost the same as, I was in the advocacy space for cancer for many years, and the one way advocates in cancer get things done
Yeah.
is to become very loud, and in a very unified, intentional way,
Yeah.
because then you can actually not ignore it
Mhm.
anymore, right? And so in a way, I think we need a similar movement in our scientific communities. And we also need the scientific organizations
Yes.
who to really step up and
Mhm.
lean into this as well. I
Mhm.
feel that in a way, many organizations have become risk adverse because
Mhm.
they don't want to step out of line or stick their neck out too much in
Mhm.
fear of retaliation
Yes.
and retribution. And so, and I understand that.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to stick up for something and then, be punished for it.
Mhm.
And so, but I think there is, again, powers in numbers. If
Mhm.
we can unify as a
Mhm.
scientific community, and if we can teach our students right from the start on how best to educate, on how to start engaging the public, on really becoming a bridge between what we're seeing and doing in the scientific community and why it matters
Mhm.
to the public, I think we
Yeah.
can actually start to make a difference. And to your point, like, does it help? Does it make any difference? Especially if people are just living their lives and,
Mhm.
not really like you and I, like trying to counter some of this misinformation. I think the way that I see it, and you brought up the radiation
Mhm.
example,
Wi-Fi, yeah.
the Wi-Fi, right? So the idea here is that the use of Wi-Fi might cause mitochondrial damage and make our blood-brain barrier more porous. Okay, so this was recently said on a very large platform podcast. And the way that and there's no scientific kind of evidence
Yeah.
behind this. There have been some animal studies which have not been replicated, but there are no human studies,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so we cannot say this definitively,
Yeah.
not yet anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something we need to
Yeah.
investigate, but we cannot say
Mhm.
that this is the cause of something. It is shared on this massive podcast. And if you imagine somebody who listens to this on a
Yeah.
regular basis, they're at home, they're cooking dinner,
Yes.
they've just come back from work, they hear this thing, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
what is this? And
Yeah.
back to the point of, we don't have the time to go in and actually do our own research to find out whether or not this is true, or whether, or
Mhm.
how supported in
Mhm.
scientific evidence this is. People can take that for what it's worth. Now take that and make it even worse. Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't vaccinate your children, or whatever the controversial subject is,
Mhm.
right? People will hold on to that and take it for the truth, because
Yeah.
in that very limited moment in time, that's the information that they're getting, and then, that's what they start to
Yeah.
believe. And so, and if we start to sway the balance between overwhelming misinformation out there, whereby the chances of you hearing something that is incorrect is outnumbered by the number of time you'll hear something that is
Oh,
scientifically correct,
absolutely. Absolutely.
we're going to be in big, big trouble.
Yeah, and I think that there is a research, an article which was published in Social Science and Medicine Journal, talking about even though after the correction, misinformation, of course, spread faster than accurate information.
Absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
empirical research which proves that.
Yeah.
Also, there's something called a concept continued effect, meaning
Mm.
that even after you see the correction, you still remember the
Absolutely.
misinformation and
Yeah.
conspiracy theory. That's the problem with it, because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
You cannot answer.
That's the
Right.
thing we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So in terms of like, making America healthy again, um, and what is going on with CDC, and I think they just hired another person who's also a little
Hmm.
bit anti-vaxxer. When you see, and they're like kind of, not collecting data on EPA or air pollution, and
Yeah.
like the things which improve our health based on decades of research.
Yeah.
Undoing it within a year with this much scale, how
Mm.
do you see the impacts of that in the years to come?
Mm. I mean, huge and will be incredibly impactful. And to your point, I think the lingering effects, even if we say are able to start or put a stop to this in the next election cycle, for example, um, the lingering effects will be huge. And so um, yes, everything from vaccines and to your point, a lot of the regulations that are being rolled back that fight against microplastics and forever chemicals in our environment or fight against air pollution, which we know causes cancers. These these regulations are critical for our health. And when we start to see them rolled back, I think the impacts can be nearly immediate and they will be long term. And so this is why it is so incredibly important to fight this not just from the ground up, but also make sure we have the right leaders in place, right? Because ultimately they are going to be driving the direction of the country with many of these decisions that cause a lot of stalling in the advancements that we have made. So not only are they undoing the progress that we've been
Mhm.
making, but they stop the progress that we would have been making as
Yes.
well. And so that's a large gap to overcome as well. I think, there's going to be a lot of work to figure out, if there is an opportunity to re-envision these systems, how might we do that so that if there is an opportunity, we're not starting from the bottom or the ground up, but we're ready and can activate immediately as well. So the hope that I take is that there are many, many, many people who care deeply about this country, who care deeply about the health of the
Mhm.
public, and are doing everything in their power every day
Yeah,
to
and
do
leading
that.
and like trying to put US in the leading position to do
Absolutely.
and things in science and technology, and you're someone who has worked between like UK and the US, like bridging the gap in science, and there are a lot of science diplomats and people, scientific advisors in a lot of embassies in Washington DC. Look
Yeah.
at European, like Austrian, Germany, France, all those embassies have their
Yes.
scientific advisors who are trying to build a relationship between the US and Europe to develop some good advancements in technologies.
Yeah.
So is it like the US right now, we are like kind of really behind? Or also, I want to ask, like, I don't want to give, a red carpet to Biden administration, honestly, because they could have seen these. They could have say like, you know what, the years which are coming after us
Yeah.
is gonna be devastating. We have to do
Mm,
something, preserve the
mm,
data, do something, pass
yeah.
those legislations, so
Yeah.
to curtail some of the work this
Mm,
administration is doing. And I don't know how could they not see it. Like this
mm,
second term is going to be the last term, hopefully.
mm.
Uh, and they promised, in Project 2025 and, all that, and the document was there, months before the election. How could they not see it? And also, how much is it kind of taking US on the back position or, back seat? They're saying, like, we are not the leader,
Yeah.
we are not the one the world has been looking up to.
Right. So I'll tackle your last part first. I
Mhm.
think I think regardless, the US still is in amazing standing when it comes to science and innovation and technology. We have led the world in these three for a very, very long time. And we have seen kind of the breakdown of some of these systems, particularly in the funding piece,
Yes.
whereby a lot of the funding has been curtailed.
Mhm.
Now, if you compare that to a country like China, for example, that is only putting more money and more
Yes.
resources
Yes.
into their scientific and technological systems to make sure that they are advancing
Mhm.
quicker and faster.
Yes.
The question does then becomes, are we still able to compete at that scale and
Mhm.
at that speed if we are systematically breaking down systems and
Mhm.
reducing our funding? And my perspective is that we cannot be the leader in the world and still cut all our funding. Those two simply do not
Yeah,
tie together, right? And
absolutely. Yeah.
so, to the extent that we will start to see a decline in our advancements, I think that's still to be seen, right?
Mhm.
I don't think we're quite yet clear on what that looks like, but we will start to see the
Mhm.
effects. And I do think that once that becomes a reality, it's the same with the health issues, whereby people don't sometimes are unable to see into the future. I mean, some people are good
Yeah.
about
Good at
anticipating
predicting
what's
or
coming,
anticipating.
right?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can kind of see
Mhm.
based on your knowledge and how systems work that
Yeah.
if you do it this way, this is what might happen. If
Mhm.
you do it some way, this is what might happen. Some people
Yeah.
are not able to do that. And I think we will, once we start to see the actual declines happening, people will start to react to counter that very quickly. It's the same with health. We can shout until we blue in the face, but until somebody actually experiences what it's like to get a devastating cancer diagnosis, to be in a system that literally bankrupts you
Mhm.
because it's so expensive and it's not designed for a patient, you simply just don't really care because it hasn't personally affected you, right? And so I think we'll start to see that with science and technology in the future. And when we do start to see a decline, there will be a massive response to that, I do believe.
I wish Biden Harris administration could have seen those, but I mean we are learning through hard way right now, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's good that you learn through hard way so you don't repeat those mistakes, and
Yeah.
we can only hope again. And what does this mean for the young early career scholars who are in graduate school doing
Yeah.
postdocs in labs
Yeah.
and work passionately
Yeah.
about improving the health and well-being of Americans and across the world when it
Yeah.
comes to cancer and HIV
Absolutely.
and these diseases. And I mean, many of them may change their career path. Many of
Yeah.
them may, and one good thing could happen is maybe they will become activists and more science communicator and
Hmm.
science literate. Like, you know what?
Yeah.
We have to take these roles. On the other, maybe they will say, you know what? This is not the career I want. This is too
Mm.
much. I don't
Hmm.
want to risk my livelihood.
Hmm.
One day you're like on the job, other day you're like laid off. And there's a lot of uncertainty, and they're like looking for these careers, and like they are going to be the leader in these institutions.
Yeah.
What does it say to them?
Look, we are in very challenging times, and I will recognize for anyone who is listening here that might be an early career scientist or
Mhm.
a trainee that times are very difficult. And but I think it is important to hold on to that everything is transient, right?
Mhm.
This period of time in which we are struggling in terms of science and technology will pass, I do believe, right? We're never stuck in this moment forever. And I think to your point that you made, we have really started to see an activation of these communities that we haven't necessarily seen before. I mean,
Before.
yes, in maybe in 2016, we started to see some unification in the scientific communities, and then that kind of waned over time. And now we're starting to see a resurgence again. And like you said, that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, these students are learning what it's like to have to stand up for your work. They're learning about how to how the importance to communicate your work is, and to be able to engage with the public. And so we're starting to change the way that, people are being trained in a way because of our environment. And I think we will learn so many lessons coming out of this that will only hopefully strengthen our scientific community, such that when we are back in a better place, when our funding levels rise again, and when it's not so challenging to get an R1 or a training grant, we will be so much better prepared for our future because of that. And so, yes, it's very challenging times. Um, I always sympathize with students coming through
Yeah,
this
because we
at
both
this
of us have
time.
been a PhD student, and we know how important it is for having a funding
Absolutely,
and working in the labs and under a supervisor and
100%.
trainings. Yeah.
And we survived okay.
Hmm.
Maybe some scrapes and bruises along the way,
Yeah.
but we came out of the systems okay. These students are facing a whole new world out there, and
Yeah.
than what we experienced.
Mhm.
And so my hope is that the pendulum will swing
Mhm.
back,
Yeah.
because it always does at some point. It's just physics, right? And so
Yes.
we will at some point get back to a better standing and a better place, and we will be much more prepared to deal with the bumps and the dips that we have in our
Yes,
careers as
absolutely. And
well.
I think, yeah, I think it's a good idea to get some help from physics so people will question less. So I
Yes.
think that others, before I ask you, my final question is, I would say, like, there's a movie and they release a trailer before the movie.
Yes.
They released the trailer in 2016. People
Mm.
liked that trailer and they wanted to see the
Mhm.
full movies. Now they have seen the full movie, so hopefully they will review it in a very
That's
badly
right.
next year, in the midterm 2026 and then
Yes.
2028. So this like, you know what? That was a horrible movie. We don't want to see it anymore. So one thing I ask all of my guests is, what is something which is we're still not talking enough when it comes to science, health and climate and misinformation, you think, and we need to spend more time talking about it?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed, particularly in my journey on social media, is that we still have not been able to do a good enough job of translating why it is important that we are doing the work that we are
Mhm.
doing. People simply don't have the time, or quite frankly want to like delve into, complex scientific studies, and understand that we need to be the translators for that, and we must do a better job to the public, right?
Mhm.
That we are working on behalf and for the public, and therefore we must do a better job of translating why it is that we're doing it
Mhm.
and why it matters.
Yeah.
And we still haven't figured out just yet why that is. In the way that I see scientists reacting now, we are on the defense, right?
Yeah.
We're having to defend our science and the results of that all the time. We
Mhm.
need to be able to get to a place where we are sharing, great news about science and how it's being done, and start to build that trust back with the public that we have, that's really been eroded over the past few years. Whether or not that's the scientist's fault or not, that is
Mhm.
completely irrelevant. The fact is that, trust has been eroded, and we need to be able to spend a lot more time and effort in rebuilding that trust with the public.
Beautiful. Yes. And I think that would also alleviate the problem that the public would defend the science. It's not the scientists need to defend the science all the time. So if we are
Absolutely.
able to communicate why it's important, having science in the society and improve our lives. If we communicate better to the public, people would be more aware, so they see themselves as a danger, how important it is to defend the science instead of just coming from the scientific community, because some people might question, oh, you know what, it's their own interest, that's why they're defending it. So it's better when we have the
Absolutely.
public support in terms of, numbers and everything, and that would bring the trust back to these institutions and things like that. But
Yeah.
with that, thank you so much again for your time. I appreciate that coming on Science Talk.